thank everybody for joining us today for this ORD workshop on crafting an overview page with goals, objectives, and specific aims. To get us started, this is a view of our agenda. I'm going to start us off with just an introduction about the Office of Research Development, then do a brief overview of overview pages, and then we will turn to our panelists. We'll hear top tips from each of them and then move into a panel discussion and questions. We hope that as we go through any of this content that you're putting your questions in the chat, and we will get to those at the panel discussion session. So we are the Office of Research Development. We're in the Division of Research, and our goal is to facilitate your research at Clemson. We do this in three main areas: faculty support, institutional advancement, and exploring new opportunities. What's going to be of most interest to you all is our faculty support. So this first column shows that we support early career academies, proposal development, support, and training. We manage nominations for prestigious awards and honors, as well as workshops and informational sessions like this one today. To elaborate a little bit further on these resources for you all, we do have a workshop archive. This includes all of our workshops that we put on, including all of those from last year, and all of the workshops from this semester will also be on there as well. We support two different early career academies at this time. Our NSF Career Academy is run by one of our staff, Jane Jacoby, and the NIH Career Accelerator Program we support as well. That's a joint venture with Prisma Health, Clemson, USC, and Furman. Our initiatives are also something that we help with at the Division of Research. We manage that process, and our initiatives are a great opportunity to get internal funding from Clemson. There are a variety of our initiatives that you can apply to, including those that support pilot funding, support a team moving to a next stage to pursue bigger funding opportunities, as well as project completion. We also have some unique funds, things that will support paying for your travel to visit a sponsor like NSF or NIH, as well as paying external reviewers to review your proposal before you submit to your sponsor. We are in the process of producing a proposal repository, and we should be releasing that this fall. This will contain a variety of funded proposals from Clemson faculty, as well as reviews and maybe some unfunded examples to show you the progression through the resubmission process. So keep an eye out for emails about the proposal repository this year. You can find all these resources on our website, which is listed below. Just wanted to highlight our upcoming workshops from ORD. Our next one is on the NSF Career Program. This is an early career program that supports young investigators. And we'll also discuss the Clemson NSF Career Academy, which is the program that I mentioned before. This workshop is coming up in a couple weeks in October. The next one will be on forming productive research teams. During this one, we will hear from our Clemson faculty, Marissa Scheffler-Porter from the Department of Psychology, who's a team science expert, and she'll talk to you about research teams in the proposal stage and how to move those along as the project moves forward. And our next one is writing to the reviewer. At this one, in early December, you'll hear from a panel of faculty discussing how to craft a proposal, keeping in mind who's actually reading it, those reviewers, and where they're coming from. On the right is also a list of our recent workshops, including our most recent Demystifying the NIH and NSF, as well as a half-day workshop we had last May on grant writing, the grant writing workshop. Again, you can find all of these on our archive on our website. So today we're discussing overview pages, and I just wanted to provide a quick orientation to what we're discussing and get us all thinking about the same thing. So what is an overview page? An overview page is a single page document, typically, and you cover three main questions. What will you do? How will you do it? And why is it important? This content can be crafted in a variety of ways, which our panelists will discuss. depending on the sponsor and how you're using that overview page. I wanted to discuss just a few of the main sponsors who require a single page document. So first up is NIH, and they call this document the specific aims page. The structure of this is fluid. There aren't specific guidelines on it, but you can sort of boil it down to a formula. And it looks something like this. You start with a hook. This should be a sentence that gets to the heart of why you're doing what you're doing. Something that's catchy, but it shows that gap where you're filling with your research. Then you move into discussing the current knowledge. What is currently known about this subject? What's the current state of the science? You boil that down into what is the gap in the knowledge. So we know what's known and then show what is not known. And move that into a statement of need, which describes why you're going to do what you're going to do, why it's useful and why it's necessary. Then you're going to talk about your goals and objectives. This can be your long-term goal for your research project, your research lab, but also the objectives of this proposal, generally speaking, how this proposal moves your research forward on a larger scale. Then you boil that all down into specific aims. What exactly are you going to be doing for this project? This is usually 2 or 3 aims, and it's going to be a statement of what knowledge is generated. So it's somewhere between what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. You can follow each of these specific aims with your hypotheses for those, as well as a sentence or two about the methods generally. How are you going to accomplish that aim? And then you summarize it all at the end, discussing expected outcomes and the impact of your research. NSF also requires a single page document. They call this the project summary. It is similar content with a few extras. So you're going to emphasize the 2 review criteria for NSF, which are intellectual merit and broader impacts. Intellectual merit is that knowledge that's generated. How is this project moving the science forward, the field forward? Broader impacts is how is your proposal impacting society? What's the benefit to society? In addition, NSF, you might have a little bit more success if you use a more concise writing style. With NIH, they have a health focus, so you can describe the issue, the health issue, with a little bit more pathos. But when you're talking to NSF, they're focused on basic science, basic research, so you might do better if you use a more concise writing style. When it comes to other sponsors, a single page is not always required. But the content of this overview page that we've discussed so far is needed for the proposal. It helps orient you with what you're going to do, helps define it, but it also helps your collaborators, helps discussions with program officers. Sometimes the content is much smaller. USDA requires an abstract that's the same content, but condensed into 250 words. Other sponsors, it's spread out. So the way you structure that narrative for the whole proposal follows these same sort of ideas. So hopefully we'll hear from our panelists today about how they've leveraged the content of an overview page when dealing with other sponsors. So we're going to move on to our panel. Today we have 4 excellent panelists joining us, and we're going to hear from each of them in turn their top tips for crafting an overview page. First up, we have Corey Calbaugh. He's an assistant professor in the Public Health Sciences Department in CBSHS, and his funding expertise is in NIH and the American Heart Association. Thanks for joining us, Corey.
Thanks for having me, Mariah, and thanks everybody for being here. I've got a timer on myself here for 5 minutes. It's on a countdown. So, okay. I'm sure all the panelists are going to say this, but to me, the specific aims page is by far the most important page in a proposal. And if you know how study sections work, you know that you have a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary reviewer, and only really the primary and secondary read it in depth. The tertiary reviewer just kind of goes along with what they do. And then everybody else probably just reads your Ames page at best. And so you gotta nail it. And so I think just some overall advice I have before I dive in further is expect to do this for a long time and to work on these rigorously and to shop them in-house to your colleagues and take their critique and make it better. And, I normally easily have 20 versions of a specific Ames page before I'm satisfied. And in my opinion, it takes less time to write the rest of the proposal because a lot of times you're pulling from things you already know. And have already done. So when you immediately right off the bat, gotta convince people that this is interesting, and you gotta write it really well. And as a side note, I'm a big fan of a scientific writing expert named George Gopen. He has a book called Sense of Structure, and I recommend all of you buy it and attend his workshops if he's ever anywhere around here or doing a virtual lecture. I've gone to 4 2-day conferences of his, and I attribute him to why I think I'm a much better writer than most people, why I've secured funding, why all of my papers are accepted at some point for publication. I have 0 papers that I've ever written that have not been accepted to some journal. And it's because of him. And it's because of taking his lessons to heart. Mariah, can you go to the next slide? I'm assuming I don't have control, right? I like that. Okay, that's good. It's just better if I'm not in control of things. Okay, so in order to do a good research project, you have to have a central hypothesis and something important, something that's measurable, falsifiable, and you gotta look at the funding opportunity. You gotta make sure you're in line. If you're submitting to National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, don't be giving them something on HIV, for example, right? Like and if they have a particular announcement and they tell you this is about implementation science and you're not an implementation scientist or don't have access to one, like don't submit. And so I normally start with the hypothesis of my study, and then I try to develop aims around that. And most projects, there are 3 aims. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks, Mariah. What I have here is just a quick, the first paragraph is really, really important, and probably the most important thing besides the actual aims themselves. And you have to tell people immediately what this is going to be about. I don't like to futz around with stuff. I like to dive right in and say, look, after reading that first sentence, you know that this is going to be, at least something about symptomatic PAD and why they have bad outcomes. You can ascertain that very quickly. And as another aside, there's a great website with NIH that I can send you guys that has, and some other slides that I've done that have like bolded things. And I like to go through after I've done this. You can keep going Mariah, and highlight the things to see, have I actually done this? By the second paragraph, you got to start getting into like what the gap is and what you're trying to accomplish. And then keep going. The third paragraph is really the aim section. Like it looks like a third paragraph, but that's really where I'm starting to say, and there's my timer, how I'm gonna accomplish what I want to accomplish, what data set sometimes. And this one was part of a career development award. And then I go into the aims, which we can talk more about. And then I have a summary paragraph. This is where you say why this is innovative and why it matters and what's gonna be the end result of this. And in my case, this was a career development award. So I got to let them know that at the end of this, I'm going to be independent. And I think that's it. That's what I have. Pretty close to 5 minutes.
Thanks, Corey. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Next up is Kara Powder. She's an assistant professor in the Biological Sciences Department in the College of Science, and her funding expertise is in NIH and NSF. Thanks, Kara.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what Dr. Calval said. And I think the biggest thing for me, as far as thinking about how to approach this, is having very clear language and message. So as was mentioned, this might be the only thing that a panelist reads. And this is somebody who votes on, votes or rates you and kind of determines whether you get a grant, but this might be the only part of the grant they see. And they might be looking at it while they're also listening to a reviewer summarize their thoughts on the grant. So that really kind of indicates the need for this document to be concise and easy to digest. And you need to be on point with your take homes and your big picture messages. So two things I wanted to suggest as far as this. So one one exercise that is completely stolen from one of my professional associations and a career development thing I did with them. So we did an exercise where everyone came in with a one-page summary document, and we traded it out, and somebody else in the group read that document. They had 2 to 3 minutes to read it. And then they had 1 minute to summarize what we said, while the writer had to remain completely silent. You can't interject and add any information. And it was really telling because the messages that you think are clear may not be clear to the reader. And this is kind of thinking about, what does the reader get? Because it doesn't matter what you wrote, it matters what the reader understands. And they also have to be able to summarize it very quickly. So if they can't summarize your message, you weren't clear enough in how you presented it. So I think it's a really useful exercise on thinking about, again, what that reader is getting and the message they are able to convey. And those readers can be your reviewers that are summarizing your grant on your behalf. And then the other thing I will mention is I am a huge fan of overview figures. And I think it's another way to present the information in a clear story. And it's another way that a reader might get your message in a different format. And I know not all funding agencies allow figures in that document, but I think the process of making it is incredibly helpful, and it forces you to clarify the way you're thinking about it and the message you are giving. So the practice of making that figure is really useful for me. And if it doesn't go in that one-page summary, it can go in your main document instead. And I know it may seem counterintuitive, but I think actually sometimes forcing yourself to have even less space can actually be helpful, because you really have to be on point and clear in your statement. And that message then can become even clearer. So I struggle with the same thing as far as, well, why am I shooting myself in the foot and taking away an extra paragraph that I might be able to put in? But I think actually sometimes that figure not only forces you to think about it a different way, but also, again, the readers have a different way of getting that same information or seeing that message twice instead. So that was really what I wanted to talk about as far as an intro.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kara. Next up, we have Tom O'Halloran. He's an assistant professor in the Forestry and Environmental Conservation Department. He is located at the Baruch Institute of Coastal Ecology and Forest Science. His funding expertise is in USDA, NSF, and an SCC grant sponsored by NOAA. Thanks for being here, Tom.
Yes, thank you. My pleasure. So I'll talk about NSF first, and then a little bit about USDA. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I've had a couple of NSF proposals funded, and I've also served on a couple of panels. So I've seen it from both sides. So that's where my information is coming from. So this was already said, and I'll re-emphasize this. I think maybe the most important thing to realize is that the project summary is the first impression that you give to your program manager and also your review panel. And so I think it's just absolutely critical to make a good impression with your project summary. I tend to write mine last at the end of the proposal writing process because in most cases, in reality, proposals are sort of living things that are evolving up until the end, especially if it's a collaborative thing where you have multiple investigators on there. And so it's important to represent the final product. Although in one of my lower statements, I say, at the same time, I think you should know the connection, the benefit of your work to society right from the beginning, from the time that you're scoping the proposal. So especially for NSF and also I think for USDA, if you don't know how your how your work benefits society, then I think you need to go back to the drawing board and make sure that that thread is present throughout the proposal and then is really represented well in the project summary. So you can draw your audience in immediately if you have a good project summary. For NSF and also for USDA, it looks like this probably isn't true for NIH because the NIH example looked actually quite scientific. But for NSF and USDA, I recommend writing at the level of the layperson, of your parents, your grandparents, and your neighbors, because your panel reviewers and your panelists are likely to not be experts in your very precise field, but they need to be able to understand it. And to do that, then you need to write at a very accessible level. I like this idea of creating tension with the problem statement and then resolving that tension, showing how your project addresses the problem. And I'll have a second slide where I'll show an example of how to write a nature abstract that I think is a great example of how to do that. I already talked about this idea of society connecting to the benefits of society. In the case of NSF, we always have to include this idea of broader impacts. Specifically, how does the work benefit society? And that can be done through the science itself. If the science itself is helping people very directly, curing cancer or something, then those can be your broader impacts. But sometimes we have to sort of think about more diverse ways that your work is interfacing with society. And so in that case, I think it's important for your project summary to have, at least a quarter of the text, if not more, connecting your science with the broader impacts. And so you don't want to give that short shrift in your project summary. And yeah, if you're writing for NSF, then you have to do a lot of homework and become very familiar with broader impacts anyway, what they are, and how to do those well. So that's kind of a whole separate thing. Okay, so then the next slide is this example that is still up on the Nature website. This is how to construct a summary paragraph for the journal Nature. And I have used this in many contexts and proposals and manuscripts and papers for years. I think it's fantastic. It's literally a sentence by sentence guide, how to write a good abstract, how to create that tension in the beginning, how to start broad and become more specific, show how you resolve your problem, and then get into more detail of the work. So I throw that out there. I think that can be a useful thing to have in your toolbox for lots of applications. And that's all I had. That I don't know how I'm doing on time, but that felt about
That's great. Thank you so much, Tom. Next up, we have Chris Frady. She's an assistant professor in the Educational and Organizational Leadership Development Department in the College of Education, and her funding expertise is in NSF and the Department of Education. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Most of what I'll share with you today comes from National Science Foundation types of expertise. And similar to some of the other panelists, I have been a submitter and I've been a reviewer. So that's the perspectives that I'll share with you today. When I think about some major considerations for the project summary, I really think about what is the purpose of it. And in my discussions with several program officers, they talk about using it for identifying program fit. And then some of your good program officers will also try, to the extent that they can, to identify some reviewers who are actually going to be appropriate to review some of your material. Doesn't happen all the time. We all get reviews back where we realize it didn't happen, but the good program officers do try to do that. So that's important in your project summary to make sure they can kind of identify what kind of expertise is needed. And then, as everybody has stated by this point, it's your first impression for your reviewer. So it's extremely important. It's part of your argument for your return on investment. Is your research potentially transformative? What is it going to do? The investors you have, again, this is something that several people have shared, you really have three groups. You have kind of your own community and discipline. You have the broader scientific community, and all those people sit on the same panel with the exact same weight in their vote. So some of them may understand your science, most of them probably won't. So being able to speak to all of those. And then, of course, kind of the taxpayer. So really kind of to the point that was previously made by Dr. O'Halloran, really thinking about speaking to the layperson and making sure that you understand that that's the consumer of this research. And then a couple of quick tips. Working with the program officer is really important. I write my program summary 3 times. I have a general overview that I send to the program officer and have a conversation with them about. And then kind of similar to Dr. Powder's suggestion, I really like the idea of using a overview figure. I haven't done that, but that's kind of the second version of my project summary. I use it kind of as my guiding star, my overview figure, and then I trash it and rewrite the whole thing. So similar to kind of what O'Halloran shared, Dr. O'Halloran shared, at the end, your proposal's evolved and changed so much. This is your executive summary. So it's time to really rewrite it, make it strong, and make it sell your piece. Reviewing funded abstracts really will help, paying attention to what people are including, how they're structuring it, how it flows. Flow is really important. Participating in proposal review, any opportunity you can volunteer to do that is great. And then, of course, making sure that you've reviewed all the NSF guidelines and regulations, and some of those have changed this year. So if you've submitted before, just make sure you're double checking on those pieces too. Next slide, please. So these are just some pieces that you can go back and look in a little bit more detail on the intellectual merit and the broader impacts, and thinking about why that's important. So when you're a reviewer on a panel, you really have 3 sections that you're submitting feedback on. One is the general overview of the grant. The other is broader merit. And the third is the intellectual merit. And the third is the broader impact. So really thinking about how to make that argument for your reviewers is important. Tee it up for them, put those words in their mouth and into their proposal reviews that they're going to be putting in and discussing in the panel. So it's a really, really important piece to look at. So of course, intellectual merit's one most people don't have trouble with. How are you contributing to knowledge? How are you pushing practice forward in your field and in science in general? One piece that I would recommend, make sure it's achievable within the life of the project. So make sure this is something reasonable that you're saying you're getting at the intellectual merit. Broader impacts are a little bit different. So if you think about things like what you can realize within the time frame of your project, broader impacts may continue after the life of your project. So that's okay to actually talk about those things extending out a little bit farther. Again, thinking about the community as a whole, and the outreach components. Different directorates and programs have different outreach components that they prioritize. So make sure that your broader impacts are aligned with that. And also make sure you're not just checking the box. That's one thing that reviewers are very sensitive to, when you're just really kind of putting in the broader impacts and it's just kind of checking the box as the placeholder, like, okay, I did this thing and now I'm moving on. Make sure it's really integrated and it's meaningful and it's substantive. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and it's just kind of some thoughts about things to include. So making sure you have a very clear problem statement helps, making sure that what you're proposing is compelling and you're showing a need for it. The purpose and objectives are important. Putting the purpose high up in your summary is important, starting kind of near the beginning. The purpose of this proposal is, here are the 3 things, 4 things, whatever it may be, that I'm going to do with this money in this proposal. The research question, something that a program officer recommended putting in there. It does take up space, but this program officer said, I really do use those to identify fit and also reviewers. So the research questions also give an idea of exactly what you're planning to do in your proposal. Theoretical framework may or may not work with different programs and fields. So in my field, where it's engineering education, very educationally focused, that is an essential component of all of the proposals, and it really needs to be present in my summary. And I need to show how that is informing my analysis, my selected methods, and really just working within the entire proposal as the guiding framework. And then finally, the 30,000-foot view of the research designs and plans. And so as several folks have shared with you, that's really tough to do in one page. Usually my first draft of my summary is really long. And Dr. Powder, I need to go back and take your advice and think about giving myself less space so that I can be more clear in identifying those things. But it's tough. If any of you guys are baseball folks, Baseball Hall of Fame is 300. And so that means that somebody's stepping into the box, striking out 7 times. And if you look at NSF, different programs have different funding hit rates, but you're talking 20 to 30%. So if you're hitting 300, you're pretty much Research Grant Hall of Fame. And, you just gotta keep stepping into the box.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. So now we're going to turn to our panel discussion. And any questions that our audience has. So please put those questions into the chat as we start off with a first question. So I think we've covered, what is the role of an overview page? I think it's, pretty clear. It's the first impression that you get to anyone who's reading it, what the point of your proposal is. So I wonder if we could just go around and talk about how can a PI consider the audience when writing an overview page? We've heard that who the audience usually is, but what are some tips on addressing that?
I can start with that one. So again, I'm probably going to be a broken record, but I think thinking about how somebody is consuming that information. So even for your primary, secondary, tertiary reviewers that are reading everything, they have a pile of 10 grants to read and they might have had a bad day or, things like that. So I think the more you can make their job easy, the better you're going to be playing out. So I think that's a big thing. So again, thinking about it is not, you're telling this to somebody who doesn't have your background, who doesn't know all of the ins and outs of what that specific term implies or something like that. So I think that's a big thing to consider. And obviously the audience is different when we're talking about these different funding agencies. So if we're thinking about the NSF funding agency, you are specifically writing to a panel. You are likely targeting 1 or 2 panels. And there is a tool, I can find the link and put it in the chat, of a section matcher, essentially, where you can submit your specific aims, or it's your abstract, not your specific aims. So your project summary, and it will match you to, you're likely going to end up in these panels. So, as somebody who doesn't study neurodevelopment, I'm not going to have a neurodevelopmental person on my panel. So I'm not necessarily writing that broad, but as compared to like an NSF panel where you might have a broader audience, but thinking about where the audience is coming from and what level of expertise they're bringing in is how I would consider this.
And I'll just add on something that was said before about return on investment and thinking about taxpayers and the benefit to society. A reviewer, a panelist that's not in your field will only like the proposal based on those types of arguments, that they can clearly understand how this project will benefit society and will produce a good return on investment. So I think that's, keeping in mind that they may not be an expert, but need to understand the value of the research is a good guiding principle.
So we have a question in the chat on theoretical frameworks. Where within a proposal could a theoretical framework be best leveraged? And is it important to allude to it in a specific aims page?
I think that I'll just answer that real quick from the NIH perspective. I think that's a really great question, a really critical thing to do. You don't have as much room as you'd want there to really flesh it out, but you'll see in the example that I provided that I at least talk about like where the origin of my research came from. One of my surgical disparities colleagues had some ideas, and I sort of am riffing on that for my own study. And then in where I discussed my conceptual model, because it's almost, at least my experience is that that's essential to have a conceptual framework that you're operating under. I talk a lot about that in the significance and background sections of proposals. So I think that's a great question, Samuel.
Anyone from the NSF perspective? We've already heard that theoretical frameworks are pretty important in NSF proposals. how do you fit that into just a one-page project summary?
I'll add in something as far as thinking about sort of the basic science versus the translational potential that comes into play for me as somebody who goes to both NSF and NIH. And I will present the same project with a very different framework around it, depending on the agency. So I think also a lot of that depends on the goals of the agency and the mechanism you're applying to and things like that. So I think that comes back to things people have said is making sure you're looking through that RFA and, you know, like what is the goal of the program? And if you're writing to something that is career oriented, make sure you're addressing that. And that framework can come into play with this too, is if you're writing to an audience where it's thinking about what is sort of the outcome and the products you're producing, you're going to write that very differently than to an agency that is concerned about sort of understanding base knowledge. So I think that's where some of these balance ideas come into play for me.
And I can add a little bit onto that. For me, when I'm putting it into the project summary, I typically put it in where I discuss my research design, since the theoretical framework really has a lot to do with the way that the research itself is designed, at least for the types of research that I do. So I'll usually mention it there. And although you don't really include citations, a lot of times you have kind of a leading theorist that you can mention at that time as well.
Going back to what Dr. Powder said, I think if what's transformational about the project is an advancement to a theoretical framework or a new theoretical framework, then certainly you want to mention that in the project summary, but you probably don't have the space. And based on the other concepts that we've put out there, you wouldn't want to get into the details of that, but a sentence or two that says, you know, we have a transformative idea about the theoretical framework that guides this field and it will change, blah, 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 then certainly you want to say those kinds of things in the project summary, but not get into the details. That's my opinion. And that would be sort of NSF, where you just don't have room and you shouldn't go into the details anyway. But NSF project summaries are actually quite short. So you really don't have a lot of room.
We have another question regarding preliminary results. So is it important to, one, have preliminary results before writing a proposal to one of these sponsors, but more on topic of the, you know, the overview page, would you include content on your preliminary results in an overview page?
For me, and this may be an unpopular answer, so the other panelists can feel free to disagree. For me, it depends on how much money I'm asking for. So if this is a really big proposal, then demonstrating that I have done, and to the point in the chat publications, prior work, I'm using some of the research that I've already done. I have skin in the game, I have experience. And so if this is a big proposal, then I'm probably going to figure out some way to integrate a small way to acknowledge that into the summary. If this is a smaller proposal, or if this is kind of a newer idea or something that's a little bit farther out there, then it's not quite as important. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it either way, but to me, it depends on how much money I'm asking for.
And I would say for me, it's not necessarily the money I'm asking for, but in general, I think it's the same type of, I'll echo what Dr. Frady was saying, that you want to hint that you have the expertise to accomplish this, and thinking about the return on investment that some of the other panelists were talking about, that you can get it done. You need to make sure you're addressing that, maybe not having a specific section in an overview page for that, because you have better things to use that space for, but there are easy ways to integrate in terms of like extending on my previous work, blah, blah, blah. But I would say it's not something I hit on heavy in the overview page, that it's in the main proposal part. Instead, there's a lot more detail there as far as any figures. I would never put a preliminary data figure in an overview page.
I agree with all that.
Excellent. Another discussion question that some of you have discussed already, that it sounds like there might be multiple ideas on this, but when should a PI write an overview page?
I can start since I haven't brought it up yet for me. I think this is, it's a living document. And as Dr. Caldwell mentioned, like, you spend a lot of time on this. I've heard rules of thumb of you should spend at least as much time on, at least for the NIH World, the specific aims page, as you do for the rest of the proposal. I don't think it ends up being that far off from that. And for me, it sort of depends on how I'm using this. In an ideal world where I'm working ahead on everything, which I think we all know that doesn't really happen often, is that, I'm writing this before I'm really getting into the actual proposal itself. So I can send it on to have a conversation with my program officers about it. So I might have a form of it that is written a year ahead as I'm thinking about it. But obviously, again, we're updating this and tweaking it. So I think there's, I think Dr. Frady was saying this, there's different versions of this that evolve as the project are evolving. And that initial overview page might not be the same document as what gets submitted. But I personally don't like writing it last. I kind of use this as an opportunity to crystallize thoughts or start conversations as well. Because if you're talking with a program officer, you are sending them this one document. You are not sending a whole proposal.
I'm similar to Dr. Powder. That's how I approach it too. And I think actually in my own work, I'll take it a step further and say that I sometimes use these documents to determine if my idea sucks or not. Like, sometimes my ideas are not that great, and I'll write an aims page and shop it to colleagues. And like, I've had colleagues be like, "You're going to tell people that smoking is bad?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, maybe I need to find a better spin on that, or explain that a little bit better than I did." So that's how I use it too. I have lots of aims pages that don't go any further. They're just, I love the notion of it as a living document, and one that's constantly edited. And I normally edit them up until the very end, because they're, in my opinion, the most important part of a proposal. So it can change, but when I actually pursue a proposal, it means it's met the muster of my colleagues and trusted friends in the field who are like, "Yeah, that's a good idea, and this is decently presented. You should keep going with that."
It gets back to a bigger discussion about how you write a proposal, and probably should start by having a meeting with your program officer, at some stage early on, where you're pitching this sort of one pager is kind of the thing for NSF. And that one pager is essentially the project summary. So yes, you probably should have drafted it to have that meeting, and then sent that to your colleagues if it's collaborative, and said, "Hey, do you want to help on this? Here's my idea." So you probably have a version of this from the very beginning. And then, as we all have said, right up until the last minute, you should be thinking about making sure that it represents the final state of the proposal.
I'll add just one kind of small thing to what I shared earlier about kind of when I write it, is that, unless this is a career proposal, it's probably something that's very collaborative with a team of people. So this is not necessarily when you write it, but it's kind of accommodating for that in your timeline. So when you're doing something collaborative with a lot of people, we all have different schedules and priorities, and that's an important thing to consider too when you're developing really all of the proposal, but specifically when you're getting into the summary page, really thinking about how to use the team and how you're going to schedule the time in.
Excellent. So we've discussed how there can be a lot of changes as the proposal comes together, especially if you're writing it up front. This document, like Kara wrote, a living document. Do you have any tips on how to manage that? I see faculty sometimes they have their idea, and then, as Chris was saying, when you meet with that team, a lot of other ideas, especially if it's interdisciplinary, these ideas start to come in, and the overview can start to change, or the scope. Any thoughts on managing that, keeping it within the fit for that funding announcement, or managing the variety of ideas that evolve?
I will say that I'm usually writing my specific aims and tweaking that as I'm tweaking the research strategy. So for me, I have a single file that has my specific aims page for an NIH and then the actual research strategy. And like I think others have mentioned, it's the last thing that finishes for me. It is getting all the final tweaks that are happening, that last little bit. So I tend to put hypotheses and aims headings from the proposal within the specific aims to provide that detail. So as I'm tweaking the wording of a hypothesis within the main document, it is getting copied and pasted into that specific aim. So it very much is sort of happening as the proposal is changing, at least for me. That's my style of writing for it.
I don't know if I would recommend this, but this is what happens to me. Similar to Dr. Powder, I have a folder that has the summary documents, and I have lots of versions, because you'll start writing on one and then you'll go back a week later and think, okay, I had something in last week's version that I think was just like this little piece that I want to pull back out. So by the time I submit, I probably have like just a laundry list of, dated documents. I'm not sure that's the best way to do it, but that's what happens to me in reality.
I do that too, only I name them like _V1, _V2. I'm the same, Chris. Like I go back to my old stuff and I'm like, I said something really good like 2 weeks ago. What version was that? Oh, it was version, I'm opening them up, but I'm the same. But I think it's a good point. Naming conventions, I think, are actually really important. And it was something that was like kind of enforced to me early on in my training, and I think it's useful.
I agree. I'm the same way, where I have a series of, I name it by date because the version number depresses me if I get up into the 30s. So I usually go by date, and then so I can go back and forth, but especially when there's sort of a big set of changes, that's not overwritten. I'm not overwriting anything. I also periodically need to go through and accept all changes. I tend to, once I sort of have a draft together, it depends on how big of changes I'm doing, I'll switch it to reviewer mode, where I have track changes and things like that. So every so often I sort of do a refresh of, let me accept all of this, and then we're going from here. And I also find that a lot easier when I'm sending around versions for feedback of, I know they're starting from this document, and actually in the couple days, if they can do a couple day turnaround, that's usually pretty good. But like in that time since I sent this to somebody, I already caught that typo, or I already made that change. I already addressed their issue, and just to do all of the version control.
Hey, the undercurrent of this is for not the non-panelists out there. The undercurrent to me is like, you need to know that you must be persistent. You must be like so rigorous with being willing to go through the hoops. And I'm with Kara. I'm often into the 20s and 30s on these things, and I never thought about it as being depressing. I like thinking of it as like, I'm really being rigorous. I'm like pushing through. And then the other thing besides persistence is just to know that it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. And I think I'm actually kind of fortunate. I did my work at UNC. I was faculty at UNC before I came here, and I had a lot more time to write there. And so my encouragement to faculty here is to try to carve out time, whatever that looks like. Block your schedule out so that you actually have the time to get to version 28, 29, and 30 of something, because that's when it is going to actually be really good.
Another thing that we haven't talked about is the reality that most of these are going to go into revision. Most of these are not going to be funded the first time around. And so you're also going to have to approach having the old version from last year and having new comments on it from your panel, and figuring out how to incorporate those, which I don't know, that's probably another session, another topic. But perseverance and is the name of the game, not getting discouraged.
I feel like this is kind of one of those documents that it's like you get good at writing them by writing them and practicing and going through the process, where version 1, or you get to the same sort of level in version 1 at a later stage than it would have been version 10 at an early stage. So it just, you get good at all of that in general with science writing. So I think that's something that to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I have a lot more unfunded than I do funded proposals. I'm sure Dr. Calbot sounds like has a lot
Ditto.
of experience than I do, so I'm going to buy this book that you're recommending. But yeah, like I said, you just got to keep stepping in the box. If you're getting 20 to 30% funded after you've started to get your feet wet with it, then you're above average, in my opinion.
I'm the same. I don't want it to sound like I've just hit it out of the park every time, especially with grants. Publications for me are different. Grants are like, I'm like everybody else, 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 or something. And at UNC, that's all they had us doing was writing grants constantly. So that's the hard part about this, my opinion, y'all. You just have to keep going. Like, you take the critique, adjust, keep moving forward, and you'll get funded.
Those are great insights. Thanks, everybody. On the same kind of idea, how should PIs solicit feedback on an overview page, and who should that feedback come from?
I want more of this at Clemson. This is something I'm interested in. And at UNC, we had a group that met within our discipline. So it might be a little more challenging here, and that's what we did, was review each other's aims. And that's how I knew if my idea was, oh, wow, Corey, smoking stinks, you're so great. Or like the grants that I have are in disparities, and they were like, this is meaningful, and way to go. And so I don't know how we do this across disciplines and stuff here, but I'd love to see more of this. And I saw somebody put in the chat that there's a resource here where the ORD external reviewer program will help us. That's a great idea. But internally, I do think we need, like, if Clemson is to continue its path to becoming an elite research institute, we must provide opportunities for junior investigators and senior investigators to review each other's work.
I agree that I think a Chalk Talk style approach to this is very useful. And I think the feedback you're getting and who you ask is different at different stages. So there's sort of a level of feedback from your colleagues and former advisors and the people you trust within the field that is sort of just the brainstorming level. That is one level of feedback. And then you have the feedback as you're getting more specific and crafting. That might be some of the same people. That might be when you go to somebody at the agency, if that's allowed, to have a discussion and see if it's fitting with a specific mechanism or proposal or portfolio. And then I think also there's the feedback that, for me, using like the external reviewer service, that is something I would do when I feel like I'm ready for review. Almost like that's when I'm ready to actually submit and I've polished. That's how I would approach it. I mean, everyone has a different style with that, but I think where you get that feedback from, it depends on what you're looking for from it. Are you looking for feedback on, generally, is the idea sound? And yeah, I know the wording's a little off. I need to work on polishing, but I just need a general thumbs up, thumbs down, versus where you're really getting into all of the nitty gritty polishing and the wording of things, where you're swapping a word back and forth and back and forth. So I think that's my advice as far as this is. The more feedback, the better. It just means that you're writing earlier, which I know is a challenge for most of us. But yeah.
I'll say that, coming from the College of Ed, that I'm really lucky that the college values and has built a lot of structure for us for that. I saw Jean, I saw you're on here. So we have Jean McKendry and Melinda Fisher who are fabulous and work with us. And those are the two best people that give me feedback. And it's really important. So in your college, if you can find your Jean and Melinda, they work with proposals all the time. They talk to funding agencies. I mean, to me, that's one of my best first conversations is, is this an idea? Do you know people you could connect me to who do this? Because if this is something newer that I'm doing, I need other people to help. I would say, finding those internal structures that you have either in your college or they've mentioned the external review. I've used that a few times and that's been really great to have external review too. So the other thing I would add to what Dr. Powder said is when I send it out to colleagues that are giving me feedback, I typically try to send it to folks who have done reviews before that kind of know what a review panel is looking for and kind of the comments, the snarky things, the good things, the things that you hear, around those tables. That tends to help too when folks who have actually kind of been in that chair, kind of give you a different level of feedback too.
So we have a question in the chat that maybe you all can touch on. So it's around the idea of a fast-moving field and how it takes several rounds of review to get funded, but by that time, your idea has become a little obsolete or is behind the ball. So do you guys have any thoughts on how you manage that, how to stay current while resubmitting an idea?
I have two comments on that. The first is snarky, and it's don't do something that's not going to be interesting in 2 years. Like, you got to build a career. You got to be doing stuff that's interesting for a long time. And the second is less snarky, and it's that I would work on simultaneously submitting to funding opportunities that have quicker turnarounds while you're also submitting to like NIH and like look for pilot opportunities. And, we've got the great R initiative segue, here and the seed grant program at Prisma and all these amazing things that can get you kind of moving in the direction, right?
Now, this may not be a popular answer, but to me, I always kind of have to know when to fish or cut bait. I've got some proposals I look back at and I think, I can't believe I spent time on that and sent it in. And it's time for me to put my efforts into something new. And to Corey's comment, just kind of thinking about, what is going to be relevant. I mean, that changed drastically, particularly in my field, I'm sure in all of yours these past few years. But yeah, I think my biggest advice on that is knowing when to fish or cut bait.
I think also realizing that political climates and funding climates change, or funding climates change with politics. So for example, I submitted this proposal 3 times and to USDA that would get great reviews. It would actually get excellence and it wouldn't get funded. And it had a lot of climate change stuff in it. And then we went into a new election cycle, a new administration, and then not that proposal, but a very similar one to it that I was on, got funded with much worse reviews. So the reviews were actually, it was ranked lower, but it went over the funding line that year. So unfortunately, there's also politics in all this. I think it is worth your while to pay attention to how the winds change at the funding agencies with things like that. And you might be able to pull out one of those old proposals that never got funded when things change in your favor and send it in again. I mean, you have to look for those efficiencies where revising and yeah, I mean, looking for efficiencies in your career, I think is really important too.
I'll just add that if it is a really time-sensitive topic, many agencies, or at least some of them, have time-sensitive mechanisms that you can use. So at NIH, there are a couple institutes that will release mechanisms for time-sensitive research. And what this does is it sort of short circuits the review process to process those quicker, go through review quicker. At NSF, it's the RAPID mechanism. So if it is something that is really timely, we had a lot of people apply for NSF RAPIDs around COVID. if something's happening and you need to gather that data ASAP, there are mechanisms for that.
And I don't know if this is good advice, but this goes back to a question that was in the chat about, should I write a proposal about something that I've never published on before? NSF has this program, Eager, that kind of complements Rapid. Rapid is time sensitive. Eager is high risk, high reward. So not having published in an area may meet the definition of high risk. You are unproven in that area, but you have a fantastic idea. That may be an Eager proposal. So I would look into that if that's your position.
I'll echo that NIH has some of the same types of mechanisms where you have sort of the big bread and butter grants, but then you also have smaller grants that like an R21 mechanism. And I think that's another thing as you're thinking about reusing things is it might not have worked for one mechanism, but it might work for either a different agency or a different mechanism, or there was a specific proposal that came out looking for, a combination of things that isn't just sort of the standard, give us an idea and we'll tell you if we think we like it type thing. So sometimes things get revived through different sources, but that comes back to thinking about what is the goal of the actual mechanism, what is the goal of the agency, and making sure you're crafting it to match.
I'll ask a quick question. So for those who have never crafted an Ames page or an overview page, what's the very first thing that you should do when you start writing these pages?
Get a bunch of dry erase markers and go to the whiteboard. Yep. They all look the same. It's brainstorm. To me, it's brainstorming, and then it's sitting down with folks, kind of to Dr. Calbaugh's comment about like, wait, you're going to tell people not to smoke, so people kind of can help you flesh out that brainstorming a little bit better. To me, that's where I always start. I start on the whiteboard. I go through a lot of dry erase markers.
Yeah, I think I'm the same, where sometimes it's just get it out. And I am definitely one who it's like blank page syndrome, where it's like, I can edit, no problem, but that first draft is hard for me. I just have to power through. So sometimes it is just, do the little things of like, okay, I need a paragraph on this, I need a paragraph on this, and breaking it up into those really manageable parts. Same with any paper or the full proposal is when you break it into like, okay, for my introduction, I need these 3 paragraphs. I can write a paragraph on this topic. Even if that paragraph doesn't end up in the final thing, you're sort of getting that process going. And I find that a lot less daunting than just, oh yeah, write the entire AIM, no problem. So I think it's just, in some ways, figuring out your writing style too, is when do you work best? Where do you work best? What's your best strategy? Do you just need crap on the page to sort through? Or are you a whiteboard and then you're crafting it there? So what goes on the page on the first draft is really worked through in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's important for us all to acknowledge this is a hard thing to do. I don't think for any of us it's easy. It gets easier the more you do, but it's never easy. When I took one of my literacy classes and teaching secondary literacy, I had a professor that told me, craft a paragraph with your students sitting in the classroom so that they can see it's just as hard for you to sit down and write a paragraph as it will be for them. And so that this kind of conversation reminds me of that. If we were all to sit down and start crafting this together, you would see it's not an easy process.
I do that very thing, Dr. Frady, in my scientific writing class I teach normally in the spring. I literally write a manuscript live with my class, and they can see me stinking and writing these ridiculous sentences that make no sense. And the Gopin thing that I'm obsessed with, like eventually writing is more natural and his lessons are like more ingrained, but it takes a lot of time, and you never stop learning how to write better. I think you always do. Real quick, while I have the floor, I'm going to share my screen. I was talking to Dr. Frady about this earlier, and this is a baseball reference, but I use this in my grants in real life lecture that I give every year a couple of times. Ted Williams was probably the greatest hitter that ever lived. Left-hander, Red Sox, Hall of Famer, missed 4 seasons due to World War II and still came back and had amazing seasons after missing 4 years of professional baseball because he was just such a good citizen and just just an amazing ball player. But anyways, he had this thing. He knew what his average was depending on where the pitch was. And my corollary is I try to hit in my sweet spot. If I can be 40% on some topic because I'm published a lot on it and because I'm super competent and have this like bank of knowledge and bank of writing that I've done, then it's wise to go after grants in that area. But you always have to be thinking long term. And there are probably some that I bat way less than two. I mean, he's the best ever. So 230 is actually not even, it'd be amazing as a grant writer. But so if I'm down in like, less than 0.100 or something on something, then I probably shouldn't write too many grants in that area. I should probably try to gravitate to things that are more in my sweet spot. And so this is my baseball analogy. I'm obsessed with baseball, and I use this in my class though all the time to just to help people understand, like, find your sweet spot, find that place where you hit 400 and try to minimize the areas where you bat 100 or 050 like I did in high school.
Also, something that was mentioned as far as sort of the real life, how it actually comes together is, people saw my drafts, there'd be the sentence where I'm like, I have no words, but I feel like there should be a sentence that has this word and this word and this word. And I don't know what that is right now, but you have all of those comments and ideas to yourself of like, I know this needs one more sentence and my brain is fried right now. And I have those periods where I can do all of those summary sentences that sort of like hit the point home in a concise way. I get in a mindset where I can kind of go through and hit those. And then there are other times where putting that together is the biggest struggle ever. So I think that's also kind of learning how you work. And I try to do my best as far as like give yourself a little break on the days where it's like, yeah, some days you got to power through it. Some days it's step away and have fresh eyes. And I think that's also something with these statements and grants in general is you need to sort of try and build in days as much as you can to take a step away. And sometimes the best thing for these documents is you wrote it and then you put it aside for a month and then you come back. And if you haven't convinced yourself, you are not convincing a reviewer. So it means you have to be working ahead on so many more of these, but also it's a way to think about the process of making them because it very much is process.
Yeah, those sentences usually tend to come at 4 a.m. or when you're in the shower and you find yourself running to the computer at the most inopportune time to fill in those sentences.
I will say also, sometimes it's the person you ask to reread it that they come back and you're like, but that was the perfect sentence. That was everything I wanted to say. And it just like, those words were not coming. It was nothing magical. It was just, it was not, you weren't able to think of it at that time, or that thing you thought of in a dream, it vanished by the time you had a chance to write it down.
So say you're a new faculty member, you've got new courses to teach, you've got publications you need to get out, you've got all the stuff that you need to do as a new faculty member. How do you find time to work on grant proposals?
So something that I did this semester is my Tuesdays are free. I do not schedule meetings on Tuesdays. That is my day to catch up on writing that proposal. If I need to be in the lab that day, that's my day of, I'm not running between meetings, I'm not teaching and things like that. The other best advice that I cannot follow for the life of me is you set aside time every single day. If you are a morning writer, that might be 8 to 9 a.m. is you are writing on some level. It could be that you are writing that abstract for a conference. It could be that you're writing for your manuscript. It could be that you're writing a grant. But those little pieces add up incredibly quickly. And again, I have the hardest time holding myself to that time. I think that's the biggest thing is you are setting an appointment with yourself. And hold true to it because there's so many other things. But I think recognizing that just writing in general, it's that practice of getting into a routine. That's by and far the biggest piece of advice I've been told over and over again, that it hasn't seemed to stick yet with me, at least.
Tom says, close that email, put your phone away. How many of us do that? How many of us get constantly interrupted with notifications on our phone? Some of my colleagues at MSU and I are actually submitting a proposal related to technostress on this very issue that's due in a few weeks. So I'm right there with you, trying to find time to write and not pay attention to my emails.
Yeah,
I will say, oh, sorry, I cut you off, but I would say sometimes it's also finding a new spot. I have been known to go to the library on campus because no one's expecting to find me there. So I can just sort of hole up, and my students don't know where I am. They know I'm on campus if there's an emergency, but finding those different locations, sometimes it's really that change in location, change in mindset. And some of those same strategies still work.
Yeah, I do that as well. And like you said, I'm also not good at scheduling macro blocks. Like I can't get up at 6 and write from 6 to 8 as much as I wish I could. But doing things like closing my email, turning my phone off buys me those critical, deep focus moments for an hour, here and there. And I would also say for me personally, and I'm sure this is a personal thing, but like I tend to succeed the most when I get into sort of this, I call it a fugue, like a deep level of focus that happens after concentrating for multiple days at a time. So and maybe that's just procrastination, but I tend to become extremely productive after focusing on something for a few days. And it's like all the ideas are there. And so during that time, then minimizing those distractions becomes really critical, because it's like, it's that it's the most productive time. And as I think Kara said, like, if you're not feeling that, if you hit that wall, you get too tired or whatever, then knowing that it's diminishing returns and you got to just hang it up and do something else or take a nap, go to bed, whatever.
And I have 2 other pieces of advice on that, kind of related. Is one piece of advice I've gotten told is set yourself goals. And if you set yourself a goal, and if you made it through your goal, we have a tendency to say, well, I'm going to keep pushing while I'm in this zone. And sometimes that is a diminishing return. So if you got through what you wanted to do and you made it through that paragraph, sometimes it's actually best to stop and reward yourself with a break and kind of enforce that. And then the other piece of advice as far as kind of minimizing the downtime with writing is you're always in that mindset, and you usually have that next sentence that is sort of in your mind as far as where you were going to go with it. And you either write yourself a Post-it note or write that next sentence. So when you're coming in the next day, you minimize that downtime of where was I going with this? What was I thinking? Is you're sort of setting yourself up to get right back into it. And it's a way to capitalize when you have a half an hour here, half an hour there, or an hour or two, instead of like a 7-hour block or something like that.
I think
I was gonna. Oh,
Dr.
no,
O'Halloran.
you go ahead.
Sorry, I think I'm more like Dr. O'Halloran. I'm a sprinter. I like to have big chunks of time, because for me, by the time I pull something back out, reorient myself to where I was, and work for just a small bit of time, I want to keep working. So I'm much better at thinking about doing projects in sprints. So I try to block out, a couple of days at a time when I can, which is nice because I have the flexibility most of the time to do that. So that helps me. If I didn't, then I would have to be going into little pieces. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Calbaugh.
No, I agree with what you said. I'm probably a sprinter too at times. I was just gonna say, I think the key is knowing yourself about and when you work best and when you do things best. And I'll just give like a self-congratulatory, self-deprecating example. From the hours of 6 a.m. until noon, I think I'm exceptional. After that, I am subpar as a scholar. And I tend to do analytic work and ticky-tack work and administrative stuff and meetings in the afternoons because my brain just does not excel. In the morning is when I'm on fire. I wake up like kind of one of those annoying people that's like, yeah, I can do this. But by noon, I'm just like toast. And so I structure my day accordingly and I write in the mornings and try not to take meetings. And just like, I think it was Kara that said like she does Tuesdays. Like I tend to schedule a ton of meetings on Fridays too, because at the end of the week, I'm not going to be a productive writer. Like I just know myself at this point. So I hope that's helpful. I think you got to just know yourself and when you're function best. And for me, that's in the mornings.
Yeah, one of the things that I would recommend to really help you learn what a really good proposal, including overview, aims, etc., looks like, is to volunteer to be on a panel. I've been writing grant proposals for over 20 years, and I still serve on panels, and I always learn something. Now, you may think, if I don't have funding, can I still serve on a panel? And yes, the answer is yes. You know, you have to think about the expertise that you can bring. And so oftentimes when different program officers are reaching out, they'll say, send me a copy of your CV or your bio sketch, or they'll have you fill out a form and put specific areas of expertise. It's your chance to really learn. And most of these panels are very interdisciplinary. So, you know, as some of our panelists were talking about at the beginning, you know, you can't just write for other sociologists, I'm a sociologist, or write for an economist or a cybersecurity expert. You really have to think about, you know, who's going to be in that panel and make sure it's not laden with jargon, you know, in whatever that you're writing. So I would encourage everybody who's here to try to serve on a panel at some point. And I think you'll really benefit from it and learn a lot that will make you a better proposal writer in the future.
I'll echo, that was a big thing for me on thinking about how I approach these. Sorry, muted myself again, but that changed once I was on the other side and thinking about that experience. It sort of shifted my focus a little bit to thinking a lot more about writing for the reader instead of, well, I'm explaining everything from my perspective, and it just changes the dynamic a lot.
What should you ask your collaborators to work on in regards to the overview page?
So I sort of said this before. In most cases, my collaborators have seen that in an early stage. That probably is how I pitched the idea to them to join the proposal, was an early draft of that. And then for me, if I'm the PI, then I'm really taking the lead, the responsibility to write that document, but I really want them to help me edit it and develop it. So I'm probably sending it to them in the last couple of weeks as we get closer to the deadline. And I'm sending it to our grants expert in the college. And I'm sending it to maybe somebody that's not involved in the project to get editorial help. So, you know, it's living, it's evolving, but yeah, I mean, I guess in some ways all throughout the process of writing it, which usually, depending on the size of the grant, that might be something that you do in, you know, few to several weeks to maybe even several months. So I don't know, that was kind of all over.
I think the biggest thing is, you know, kind of as Dr. Halloran was saying, is thinking about what you want. So if you're looking for general feedback as far as the structure, that's a different thing than looking for the specific wording. And I think the other thing to keep in mind with collaborators is just being cognizant of their time. It means you're working ahead that much more, but also we all have a lot going on. So, you know, everyone's going to have their different rhythm. Some people will be able to get to it right away. Others are slammed that week. And so the couple of day turnaround. So just making sure you're having those conversations to know what everyone else's timetable and availability is during especially those last critical few weeks. So you know who needs to see it a couple weeks ahead of time, and then we'll give the thumbs up and say, I trust you on the last 2 weeks, versus the people that they're going to be the final polishing, and different collaborators might serve different roles.
Yeah, I would echo the roles part. It's kind of like what I tell my PhD students when they select their committee: be intentional about who you choose and why they're there. Same thing for collaborators in a grant. And so when you're thinking about doing your proposal, I mean, similar to what Dr. Calbaugh said, they've probably been involved in the summary from the get-go and kind of the main ideas and objectives and the frameworks and those things. But then when you get down to actually having a target to shoot at, if you will, you use those different people who are there for those reasons in those different areas. So you may just be asking for feedback in a certain area, or you may have somebody who's a great editor that can help you tighten stuff up. You may have someone who's just a figurehead and you're sending an FYI to them and they're just on the grant for that purpose. I mean, you really have a lot of different reasons that you have collaborators. And so I would say know their strengths and know how they work, because some people are not going to give you feedback. Some people are going to take forever to give you feedback. So it's just kind of figuring out the ebbs and flows of who you're working with and using their strengths.
What about the idea of resubmitting grants to different agencies? Maybe because we have a lot of expertise on, multiple sponsors, is there a good way to rewrite an overview page for a new sponsor? Or is it something that is better scrapped and started from scratch again?
I know this was mentioned, but I'm a big fan of reuse information that's already crafted if you can. But I think it is something you have to be very careful and conscious about, because, there are some agencies or projects where you can basically be submitting to two different places, really the same idea at the same time. And you sort of figure it out on the other end if you're lucky enough to have both things funded. But other places, once it's submitted, you cannot use that again. So you might be able to use paragraphs and you can basically pitch the same idea, but applied to something different. That's a different grant. So I think it's something to know your agencies when you're thinking about it. And also sometimes it's knowing the leniency that is given to certain types of investigators. So for instance, I know that NIH NSF tends to give a little more leniency on pitching the same thing to multiple places for junior people. And if you are a senior person, it's a no-no. So I think just being aware of some of that, but also if you're using the same approach applied differently, it's okay to grab that sub-aim from one grant and definitely make sure you're tweaking it, reworking it, but that's fair game. It's your idea, it's your approach. You would still describe it in the same way, but chances are it's not going to end up exactly the same by the end of things.
I think you'd be foolish not to recirculate things as much as you can. It just is the name of the game. You gotta adjust, get your critique, change, get it back out. I mean, that's just how I've been successful. I think it's like, I just am like, okay, that one didn't land there, but here's this other thing. And this person said this about it. So I'm going to make that better. And then I'm going to submit it to this thing. And then if I can, I'll resubmit it to this other thing. And recycling proposals is common. And I think it gives you a much better chance, particularly when you've really crafted things and feel good about the writing and the way you're communicating. And sometimes it's just about who the agency is and what their priorities are at the time. So I do a lot of American Heart stuff also. And, I don't always fit their mission, but when I have something that does, behooves me to look and get it in there. And then once you have a track record with places, I think that also helps.
And that's sort of there's a question in the chat about, is it better to submit multiple proposals with slightly different approaches to multiple funders, taking the shotgun approach, or focus on one topic and then keep resubmitting on that. And so two things I'll mention on that, and especially thinking about sort of as you recraft, is kind of both. So there's a question earlier about how long does it take to get an answer, and 6 months, 9 months, sometimes depending on the cycle. So with that timeline, you can't just sort of do one and then wait. You kind of have to always have things at different stages. And it might be that you are revising one grant for one deadline while you're writing a new one for another deadline. So you're sort of balancing those needs. There's always something in the pipeline where it's not the first time through, because you have to plan for that resubmission as well and the reworking of it. So I think there's that of you can't, it's really hard to have a career where you're doing one grant and that's it. But I think also you have to balance that with the idea of more is not always better. I know we tend to get this comment of like, but you have to shoot your shot until to even have a chance, which is absolutely true. But also, for me, if I try to do 5 grants at once, I am just making all of them worse. So I can't do that personally. And if you're revamping and just revising all of those, maybe that's a different situation. But I think there's also, a balance of, well, you're never going to have a chance if it's not solid to start with. So if you are submitting crap, basically, well, that's not going to help either. So I think there's definitely that balance in there too. And that's partly knowing yourself and knowing what you can do at that time, because some semesters you can do it, other semesters you can't. And sometimes it's just depending on, are you revising? Are you writing fresh? Because writing fresh takes a really long time. Revising, well, it depends how much does it need to be revised. Is it tweaks, or are you really, you're kind of starting fresh? So I think that's my suggestion as far as, do you go for everything or resubmit and resubmit just the same thing? And I think, there's definitely something to submit to the small things, just a part of that grant, or then you have the big one where if that pays off, fantastic, but you kind of have to balance some of that.
Kind of thinking about the previous question about sending grants out to different places and reusing them, I would just say, think about them like a cover letter. So you're always going to tailor your cover letter, your CV, to whoever you're applying to, the department, the college. So you've got good pieces and building blocks, reusable learning objects, what we call them in the world of education. But you're going to tailor it each time you send it out, something specific. You're going to make some major changes to how you're presenting kind of similar concepts and ideas.
Hey, can I comment on the Peng Chen's question about framing a proposal? I think that is a wonderful question, and I think is really key to getting funded, because reviewers sniff this stuff out real quick. Like, they know, oh my gosh, like that person's trying to do that in a year or 2 years. Give me a break. And so I think my recommendation is to leverage your senior mentors a lot in this way. People that have a history of funding and people that know what's too much, and go accordingly. And you got to think about, like, what's your experience been so far and how fast you do things, and or how fast things can get done. Even the best scholars move research projects pretty slowly. And like, I've got my K is 5 years, and the pandemic obviously threw a wrench in some of those things, but it really, I wrote it the first time for 4 years, and they were like, come on, buddy. Like, seriously, you're not getting that done in 4 years. And they were right, because now I'm about to start my 3rd year on it, and I'm not going to finish it in 4 years for sure. The 5th year is going to be key. They just know, they're smart. They know these things. And so you got to sniff that out in-house first, I think. So talk to your mentors and figure out how to take your idea And remember, you're also trying to build a career. So you want to bite like one piece off at a time. Don't bite off too much. Bite off something that you can do and do it really, really well.
Yeah, along those lines, I think we emphasized a lot with the summary page, making a good impression on your program officer, making a good impression on a panel who only a few of whom will be experts and understand you. But ultimately, there will be one expert or maybe two who pretty well understand you and make the sort of authoritative judgment on the quality of your proposal. That person, those folks are your peers. You're being judged by your peers. And so keeping in mind that what your peers ask themselves is this reasonable? Could you do this in 5 years? Can this person do this? Do they have enough money to do this in this budget? And is this a good question? Is this not enough? Like, oh, this isn't enough. I was once on a panel of NSF careers, and somebody who was already pretty famous, pretty junior in their career, put a proposal in, and everybody that read it was like, this isn't really enough. Like, it's not hard enough. It's not enough work. You know, they're underselling. And so, you know, keep that in mind also as your audience when you're writing the proposal itself, is it really is your peers asking themselves how it hits them. You know, could they do this? Is this reasonable? Do you have the money to do it? And those things can definitely make or break you. As Dr. Calvas said, I mean, they will sniff that out in a hurry. Like, this is just not doable. So I hope that helps with this idea of scope, too big or too small. It should be reasonable. It should be realistic.
And along those lines, I think it's important to remember that whatever your idea is, it's probably too big. Like, we all, especially junior people, we all are like shooting for the moon, right? Trying to save the world quickly. And the world is not savable, ... quickly, ...
So the last question I have for us today is, are there any fatal flaws to avoid when writing an overview page?
For me, I think the biggest fatal flaw is not putting in the time and taking it seriously enough. That if you think of it as sort of, okay, this is the last thing on the list, I can get that done in an hour, that's not this document. So I think otherwise, the general things that you don't want to do in a grant anyway, like typos or that sentence that you just trailed off on, I think all of those, it's the same types of things, it's amplified in some ways for this document. So I think that's the biggest thing, is make sure you take it seriously, because again, this might be the only thing people see.
My quick thoughts are, and I'm notorious for doing this, and somebody calling me out on it, is aims that build on each other. There's like some weird art form that I haven't quite discovered where you like do a cool project without making things totally build on each other. And I think some of that is actually just wordsmithing and like, just for a quick example, y'all will see from my slides, that's my aims page for my funded KO1. Originally I had my first aim was just identify disparities between Black and white patients with a particular condition. And in my first review, back to Dr. O'Halloran's point about everything gets revised, nothing gets funded on the first try, they were like, hey, your aims build on each other. What if you don't find any disparities between? And I was like, well, first of all, that's stupid, because there are going to be disparities. Do you know anything? But also, it was my fault because I should have written it better. So when I rewrote it, it was determine the extent of disparities that exist, and I put more evidence in the proposal of here's why this was actually a real thing already, and I'm just trying to build on it. But you'll get that's a death sentence in my field if you have aims that are dependent on each other, so that everything must stand alone in some capacity.
That brings up a really great point on sort of the psychology of all of this, is we all have the reaction of, that's a stupid comment, that's a stupid reviewer comment. But you have to learn the skill to like take a deep breath and say, but the reviewer said it, the reviewer thought it. Somehow they got to the point where that's what they thought and they wrote it down. And so you really have to have this skill to take a deep breath, step back, come back a day or two later and reread your reviews and think, okay, how did the reviewer get to this stage? Why did the reviewer make this comment? And it's on you. Ultimately, it's on you. You got to go back, you got to revise it, send it back the next time where you got in the reviewer's head and you were like, I thought that was obvious, but obviously you didn't. So let me, I'll lay it out there.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that most of the time when you're like, but I said it 3 times, but it's still on you that there was something not clear in how you said it, or maybe it is you need to reword it at each time so it might hit that person that time. And the advice I got told, and this is generally for grants or even paper reviews, is write that one version where you get out all your rage and you write exactly what you'd actually want to say. And you write it out, get it out of your system, and then sit and come back in a day or two and you go back and reread for the kernels of truth. Because as Dr. Halloran had said, is that there's some reason it came up, whether it was a lack of clarity, you didn't get into the details enough, you didn't make that connection, because it's your job as the writer to make all the connections. It's not the reviewer's job to put those 2 pieces of information together. You need to do that. So I think a lot of that is, it comes into play when you're thinking about reviews, and a fatal flaw is being defensive and like, why didn't you get this? And that type of thing. That's not going to help anyone.
This is Gopin's whole thing. That's why I recommend that book so strongly, is because that's his thing. You're writing for their perspective. Whatever you don't communicate to them is your fault, and you got to own it.
The only thing I would add to that is it is astonishing how many times I've seen people basically copy and paste the first page of their proposal as their summary when I'm sitting on a review panel. And I mean, people have made comments about that before, what a wasted opportunity. And, your first page is really not your executive summary of your grant. So I would say resist that urge. Don't be that person, because they will talk about you in the panel if you do that. And then the other thing goes back to a comment Dr. Crowder made earlier, don't include too much. Make sure the reviewers can see the forest. If you get down in the trees or the weeds or whichever kind of an analogy you want to use, your reviewers are not going to see the big picture. And that is really the whole purpose of presenting the project summary. Give them the big picture, get them excited, make them want to read the next 15 pages or however many the proposal has.
Yeah, I will say as a reviewer that you have a feeling after just that one page, if you think it's going to rate high or not so much. That's a hard feeling to turn around, whether it's fair or not. It's just everyone's going into those next 6, 12, 15 pages with an impression and a feeling. So this is your chance to give them the impression that you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about, and it's exciting. So you need to convey all of that in a very short space, which is why these are so challenging.
Hey, Mariah, these comments made me think it would be super useful maybe at some other point down the road to have a workshop like this on how to write the 1-page response that tend to go with revisions, because none of us get our grants on the first try. And I think that is like truly an art form also. The aims are an art form. Condensing all of your feelings and all of your responses and trying to find buckets for things so that you can fit it all in 1 page is also a really neat skill to develop.
Yeah. If you want to hear more about this topic, we have a workshop that's recorded from last year on revising and resubmitting. So everyone's welcome to view that. And then it also flows really well into our last workshop this semester on how to write to that reviewer. So we'll be discussing all these topics in more detail, but I love that idea, Corey, as well. Well, thank you to our panelists today. We really appreciate all of your excellent insights, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us. So thank you everyone for joining today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for all the great panelists too. This was really, really a great session.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks everybody.